Her name was Elara Boone, a woman forged in the crucible of 3 massacres. Her heart a locked vault no man could breach. They called her too fierce to love, a legend of Black Mesa, whose icy gaze could stop a warrior cold. In the winter of 1878, a single choice thrust her into a storm of betrayal and redemption, where a Comanche war chief would challenge everything she knew. Would she remain a weapon or become something more? The answer lies in a tale that reshaped a frontier. Subscribe now, share where you're tuning in from, and dive into a story where truth might just outshine vengeance. Can Elara break her chains? Stay to find out. The wind howled like a wounded beast across the New Mexico desert, clawing at the weathered walls of Black Mesa in the winter of 1878. The fort squatted in the sand, a stubborn scar on the landscape, its lanterns flickering like dying stars against the dusk. Inside, tension hung thicker than the dust clouds rolling off the horizon. Comanche raids had bled the migrant trails dry, and every soldier's trigger finger itched for a target. At the heart of this powder keg stood Elara Boone, a 27-year-old scout whose name was whispered with equal parts awe and fear. Her eyes, sharp as flint, cut through the dim light of the mess hall where she leaned against a post, cleaning her Colt with a rag that smelled of gun oil and regret. They called her too fierce to love, a woman who'd walked through 3 massacres and come out with a heart cased in iron. Her chestnut hair was tied back tight, her leather duster creased with the stains of 100 rides. She didn't smile, didn't flirt, didn't soften for anyone, not the greenhorn privates or the grizzled sergeants who'd seen too many winters. Elara was a blade, honed by loss, and Black Mesa knew it. But tonight, something stirred in the air, a restless hum that set her nerves on edge. Captain Mallon, a wiry man with ambitions bigger than his britches, paced the room, his boots thumping on the warped floorboards. His mustache twitched as he barked orders, his voice oily with the promise of promotion. "We've got a Comanche spy, boys," he announced, savoring the word spy like it was whiskey. "Caught her skulking near the ridge, fresh off a rum runner's camp. She's headed to Santa Fe for trial." The men murmured, their eyes glinting with the hunger for justice, or vengeance. Elara's fingers paused on her Colt. "Trial," he said, but she knew better. Santa Fe was a death sentence with paperwork. The prisoner was brought in, her wrists bound with coarse rope. Ayanna, barely 20, stood small but unbuoyed, her dark hair matted with blood from a shallow gash on her temple. Her eyes darted like a cornered doe's, not with guilt, but with a secret too heavy to carry. Elara stepped forward, her shadow falling across the girl. "What's your story?" she asked, voice low, like gravel under a boot. Ayanna's lips trembled, but she said nothing. Mallon smirked. "She's Comanche. They don't talk. They scheme." He waved a hand. "Boone, interrogate her. Get me something I can send to the governor." In the cramped cell, lit by a single candle that spit wax onto the dirt floor, Elara faced Ayanna. The girl's silence wasn't defiance, it was fear, the kind Elara had seen in survivors who'd watched their worlds burn. "You're no spy," Elara said, leaning close, her breath stirring the stale air. "But you're hiding something. Talk, or Mallon'll have you swinging by dawn." Ayanna's gaze flickered, a spark of trust fighting to surface. "Not spy," she whispered, her English broken but clear. "They take me. Rum men. I run." Elara's gut twisted. She'd seen rum runners work, vultures who'd sell their own kin for a bottle. But Mallon wouldn't care. He needed a trophy, not the truth. Elara marched to Mallon's office, the floor creaking under her spurs. "Hold the transfer," she said, her tone flat but unyielding. "She's no spy. Give me time to dig deeper." Malin's eyes narrowed, his chair scraping as he stood. "You're a scout, Boone, not a lawyer. I need this win, and that girl's my ticket to Santa Fe's good graces." His voice dripped with greed, and Elara's hand twitched toward her Colt. She forced it still. "You're betting on a lie," she said. Malin laughed, cold as the desert night. "Truth don't get me a colonel's star." As midnight cloaked Black Mesa, the fort went quiet, too quiet. Elara stood watch on the ramparts, her breath fogging in the chill. Then she saw them, shadows on the ridge, still as stone totems. No hoofbeats, no war cries, just figures etched against the moonlight. Her rifle snapped to her shoulder, but something held her trigger finger. A voice cut through the dark, deep and steady, calling her name. Elara Boone. It was Chayton Blackthorn, Ayanna's brother, a Comanche war chief whose name carried the weight of a dozen raids. He stepped into the lantern's glow, his face scarred, his eyes burning with purpose. Behind him, a handful of warriors waited, their ponies snorting mist. "I come for my sister," Chayton said, his English clipped, each word a blade. "She is no spy. Give me 3 days to prove it. If I fail, I surrender to you." The fort's alarm bell stayed silent. His men hadn't attacked. Elara's mind raced. She knew Chayton's reputation, ruthless, unrelenting. But his eyes held something else, a grief she recognized from her own mirror. Years ago, she'd freed a man she thought innocent, only to watch him slaughter a settler family. That mistake haunted her, a ghost in every shadow. Trusting Chayton could be another. "You expect me to believe you?" she asked, rifle steady. Chayton's gaze didn't waver. "I expect nothing. I offer truth." The words hung heavy, a challenge she couldn't ignore. Malin's men stirred, rifles cocking, but Elara raised a hand. "I'll go with you," she said, her voice cutting the tension like a whip. "Not because I trust you, but because I won't let another mistake bury me." Chayton nodded, a flicker of respect in his eyes. As she holstered her Colt and stepped toward the gate, the desert seemed to hold its breath, waiting for blood or something braver. The desert night swallowed Elara Boone's silhouette as she stepped beyond Black Mesa's gates, her Colt a cold weight at her hip. Chayton Blackthorn's warriors melted into the shadows, their ponies' hooves muffled by sand, leading her and Ayanna into a world where starlight was the only law. The air bit like a blade, sharp with the promise of frost, and Elara's breath hung in clouds, each one a reminder of the gamble she'd just made. She wasn't here to trust Chayton. She was here to cage her ghosts, to keep another mistake from clawing at her soul. The trail wound through canyons carved by time, their walls looming like silent judges under the moon's pale glare. Chayton rode ahead, his broad shoulders cutting a stark line against the night, Ayanna at his side, her face drawn but resolute despite the blood crusting her temple. Elara kept pace, her mare's hooves crunching gravel, her eyes scanning the ridges for betrayal. The Comanche were ghosts on horseback, moving with a grace that made her cavalry training feel clumsy. Silence stretched taut, broken only by the creak of leather and the distant howl of a coyote, mourning something lost. By dawn, they reached a dry wash where skeletal mesquite clawed at the sky. Chayton dismounted, his moccasins silent on the cracked earth, and knelt to study faint tracks, wagon ruts, boot prints, a smear of ash. "Rum runners," he said, voice low as a storm's rumble. "They trade guns, not just liquor." Ayanna saw their deal go sour. Elara's jaw tightened. Gunrunners meant blood, always. She glanced at Ayanna, who nodded, her eyes haunted. "They killed their own," Ayanna whispered. "Left me to take the blame." Elara's fingers brushed her Colt, the metal grounding her. This wasn't just about Ayanna. It was a spark, that could set the whole territory ablaze. They followed the tracks to a narrow gorge, its walls streaked red like old wounds. The air grew heavy, thick with the stink of stale smoke and something sweeter. Rotting. Elara's mare snorted, uneasy, as they rounded a bend and found a boy crouched by a dead campfire, his hand stained with dirt. Jonas, no older than 15, a Métis kid with eyes too old for his face. Elara froze. She'd pulled him from a burning wagon years ago, a half-starved orphan she'd thought she'd saved. But his gaze met hers, and it wasn't gratitude. It was a blade, cold and unforgiving. "You," Jonas spat, standing, his thin frame taut as a bowstring. "You don't get to play hero." Elara's chest constricted, the desert air suddenly too thin. She remembered his mother, a Métis woman caught in a raid, running from soldiers Elara had led. A shot had rung out. Friendly fire, they'd called it. But it was Elara's pursuit that put her in the crosshairs. "I didn't know," Elara said, her voice rough, like sand in her throat. Jonas laughed, bitter as bile. "You didn't care. You hunted us like dogs." Chayton watched, silent, his eyes unreadable, but Ayana's hand touched Jonas's arm, a quiet plea. Jonas relented, not for Elara, but for Ayana. "You're chasing Asher Creed," he said, kicking at the ashes. "Ex-officer, gunrunner. He framed your girl to start a war. Sells rifles to both sides, laughs while we bleed." He pointed to a leather pouch half buried in the dirt. Elara retrieved it, her fingers brushing a ledger. Pages scrawled with deals, dates, names. Creed's name looped in bold ink, tied to Mallin's fort. A scrap of Ayana's scarf, torn and deliberate, lay beside a map marking Black Mesa's patrols. It was a setup, clean and cruel, designed to pit Comanche against cavalry. Elara's blood ran hot, the ledger trembling in her hands. She'd known Creed, saved him once, years back, when he faced a noose for desertion. She'd believed his lies, cut his ropes, and let a viper slither free. Now he was orchestrating chaos, and she'd been his unwitting pawn. "Where is he?" she asked, her voice a low growl. Jonas shrugged, his eyes hard. "Gone to ground. But he's close. He likes to watch his plans burn." Chayton crouched, tracing the map's lines. "He'll be at Red Needle, a day's ride. We move now." His tone left no room for debate, but his glance at Elara held a question. Could she keep up, or would her guilt slow them down? As they mounted, Elara felt Jonas's stare boring into her back, a reminder of the lives she'd shattered. The desert stretched ahead, vast and merciless, hiding Creed's lair among its thorns. She gripped her reins, the leather biting her palms. This wasn't just about saving Ayana. It was about clawing back the piece of herself she'd lost to that long-ago mistake. Chayton rode beside her, his silence not hostile, but heavy, like he saw her scars and didn't flinch. The gorge closed around them, a tunnel to truth or a grave, and Elara spurred her mare forward, the weight of her past trailing like dust. The desert's jaws snapped shut behind Elara Boone as she rode out of the gorge, the weight of Jonas's accusations and Creed's ledger burning in her mind like a brand. Red Needle loomed on the horizon, a jagged spire stabbing the sky, its shadow promising answers or death. Chayton Blackthorn's pony kept pace, his silence a steady anchor in the swirling dust, while Ayana rode slumped, her wound sapping her strength. The sun climbed, merciless, baking the earth until it cracked like old leather. Elara's mare snorted, sensing the tension in her rider's grip. This wasn't just a hunt for Creed. It was a reckoning with the ghost of her own failure, the man she'd loosed to wreak havoc. The trail to Red Needle twisted through a maze of arroyos, each one a perfect ambush. Elara's eyes flicked to every shadow, her Colt ready, while Chayton scanned the ridges with a predator's calm. "He's close," he said, voice like distant thunder. "Creed's kind don't run far from their poison." Ayanna, pale but defiant, pointed to a faint wisp of smoke curling from a cleft in the rock ahead. A camp, hidden but careless. Elara's pulse quickened, the ledger's damning pages flashing in her mind. Creed's deals, Mallen's complicity, her own blind trust years ago. She'd cut his noose, thinking him a victim. Now, she'd forge his chains. They tethered the horses in a dry wash, creeping toward the cleft on foot. The air stank of sweat and gunpowder, the ground littered with spent shells. Elara's boots crunched softly, each step a countdown. Chayton signaled, his knife glinting as he flanked left, Ayanna staying low behind a boulder. Elara eased forward, her Colt drawn, when a voice slithered from the dark. "Little hawk," it purred, venomous, familiar. Asher Creed stepped into the light, his lean frame draped in a duster, a Winchester cradled like a lover. His smile was a snake's, eyes glinting with cruel delight. "You're late to your own funeral," Elara froze, the old nickname a dagger in her gut. She'd saved him, believed his sob story, and he'd repaid her with blood. "You framed Ayanna," she said, voice steady despite the rage boiling inside. "You're selling war for profit," Creed chuckled, spitting tobacco into the dirt. "War's good business, Boone. You and your Comanche friends just make it easier." He raised his rifle, but Chayton lunged from the shadows, knife flashing. Creed fired, the shot grazing Ayanna's side as she dove for cover. She crumpled, blood seeping through her shirt, and Chayton's roar shook the canyon. Elara fired, her bullet clipping Creed's shoulder, but he vanished into the cleft, his laughter echoing. Chayton charged after him, eyes wild with fury, but Elara grabbed his arm. "Stop," she hissed, her grip iron. "Kill him now, and Ayanna dies. We need him alive to expose Mallen." Chayton's chest heaved, his knife trembling, but her words pierced his haze. He looked at Ayanna, bleeding but breathing, and nodded, the fire in his eyes cooling to steel. Elara knelt beside Ayanna, tearing her scarf to bind the wound. "Hold on," she whispered, her hand steady despite the chaos. The cleft was a warren of tunnels, dark and tight, the air thick with damp earth. Elara led, her Colt a lifeline, Chayton's knife at her back. They moved like wolves, silent, tracking Creed's blood trail. A lantern flickered ahead, revealing crates stamped with army brands, Creed's arsenal, enough to arm a small war. He was cornered, but dangerous. "You can't stop it," Creed taunted from the dark, his voice bouncing off stone. "Mallen's bought, the territory's primed. You're just kindling." Elara's jaw clenched. She'd been his pawn once, not again. They rounded a corner, and Creed sprang, his knife slashing. Elara dodged, her Colt barking, but the shot went wide in the cramped space. Chayton tackled him, the two men crashing into a crate, wood splintering. Creed fought dirty, a blade in each hand, but Chayton was a storm, his strength born of loss. Elara circled, waiting for a clear shot, when Creed's knife grazed Chayton's ribs. "Enough," she snapped, slamming her Colt's butt into Creed's temple. He slumped, blood pooling, alive but out cold. As they dragged Creed's limp form into the sunlight, Elara's chest tightened. Ayanna was stable, but weak, and the ride back to Black Mesa would be brutal. Chayton bound Creed's wrists, his eyes meeting hers, not with hate, but with something new, a grudging respect forged in shared scars. "You fight like a warrior," he said, voice low. "But for what?" Elara looked at Ayanna, at the ledger in her pack, at the man she'd once freed now in chains. "For truth," she said, "and maybe for me." If this story's gripping you folks, hit that subscribe button. It keeps us bringing tales like Elara's to life. Drop a comment. Tell us where you're tuning in from. What's driving Elara now? Stick around to see if truth can outrun a bullet. They mounted, Creed slung over a pony, the desert sprawling before them. Black Mesa waited, a fortress of lies ready to crumble, or bury them all. Elara spurred her mare, the ledger heavy in her saddlebag, her past and future riding on the edge of a knife. Black Mesa's walls loomed like a judge's gavel as Elara Boone rode toward its gates, the ledger's weight in her saddlebag heavier than any bullet. Asher Creed, bound and slumped over a pony, was a living fuse, ready to ignite the fort's lies. Chayton Blackthorn rode beside her, his face carved from stone, Ayanna clinging to life in his shadow, her bandages soaked red. The desert sun scorched the earth, painting their dust trail blood orange, and Elara's mare snorted, sensing the storm brewing ahead. Truth was their weapon now, but Black Mesa was a fortress built on fear, and fear made men pull triggers. The fort's gates creaked open, but not in welcome. Captain Malin stood on the ramparts, his mustache twitching like a cornered rattler's tail, flanked by soldiers, with rifles glinting like vultures' eyes. "Traitor!" he bellowed, his voice cracking the dry air. "Boone sold us out to Comanche dogs." The accusation hit like a whip, and the soldier's barrel snapped up, a bristling wall of steel. Elara's hand hovered near her Colt, but she forced it still. Drawing now would paint the sand red. Chayton's warriors tensed, their knives half drawn, but he raised a hand, his calm a tether holding back chaos. Elara dismounted, her boots thudding in the silence, and faced the firing line. "If I betrayed you," she said, her voice clear as a bell in a dead town, "I wouldn't be standing here." Slowly, deliberately, she unbuckled her gun belt and let it fall, the Colt hitting the dirt with a dull thump. The soldiers blinked, caught off guard, their fingers loosening on triggers. Chayton watched her, then dropped his knife, the blade sinking point first into the sand. One by one, his warriors followed, their weapons piling like offerings at a forgotten altar. The act was a gamble, raw and reckless, and it stole the fort's breath. Malin's face purpled, his hand jerking to his pistol. "You think this saves you?" he spat. "You've brought hostiles into our midst." Elara stepped forward, the ledger raised like a shield. "I've brought proof," she said, her eyes locking onto his. "Creed's ledger. Your name's in it, Captain. You're his puppet, selling out this fort for a cut of his gun money." She tossed the book at his feet, its pages flapping open to reveal scrawled deals, dates, and Malin's signature. The soldiers nearest him leaned in, their murmurs rising like a wind before a storm. Jonas, the Métis boy, pushed through the crowd, his young face hard as flint. "She's telling the truth," he said, voice steady despite the rifles trained on him. "Creed paid Malin to frame Ayanna, to spark a war he could profit from. I saw his camp, his crates, his plans." The boy's words landed like sparks on dry grass, and the soldiers' eyes flicked from Malin to the ledger, doubt creeping into their ranks. A sergeant, grizzled and squinting, picked up the book, his fingers tracing the damning lines. "This is your hand, Captain," he growled, holding it up. Malin's bravado cracked, his pistol trembling. "Lies," he shouted, but his voice was a cornered animal's, shrill and desperate. He swung the gun toward Elara, his finger tightening, and time slowed to a crawl. Chayton moved, a blur of muscle and instinct, but Elara was faster. She shoved him aside, her shoulder taking the bullet meant for him. Pain exploded, hot and blinding, and she staggered, blood soaking her duster. The fort gasped, a collective flinch, and Jonas reacted, his own pistol barking. Malin fell. a crimson bloom spreading across his chest, his eyes wide with shock. Chaos erupted, soldiers shouting, warriors reaching for blades. But the sergeant roared, "Hold your fire!" His voice was a whip crack, and the men froze, rifles wavering. Elara sank to one knee, her vision swimming, but she gripped Chayton's arm, her nails digging in. "Show them!" she rasped, nodding at Creed, who was being dragged forward, groggy but alive. Chayton hauled the gunrunner into view, ripping open his shirt to reveal army tattoos, a traitor's mark. "This is your war," Chayton said, his voice carrying to every corner. "Not ours." The soldiers lowered their rifles, one by one, the ledger's truth sinking in. Creed was bound, Malon's body carted away, and Ayanna, pale but standing, was freed. Elara leaned against Chayton, her shoulder screaming, but her eyes burned with something fiercer than pain. "We did it," she whispered, blood on her lips. He met her gaze, his own scars mirroring hers. "Not yet," he said, his voice soft but unyielding. "Truth's just the start." The fort's gates stood open, the desert beyond waiting, and Elara knew this wasn't the end, just a crack in the wall of hate. The desert exhaled as Black Mesa's gates yawned wide, its walls no longer a barrier, but a witness to the fragile truce born of Elara Boone's blood. Her shoulder throbbed. The bullet wound a searing reminder of the price she'd paid. But she stood tall, leaning on Chayton Blackthorn's steady arm. The fort's parade ground buzzed with uneasy life, soldiers and Comanche warriors eyeing each other like wolves circling the same kill. Ayanna, pale but upright, clutched Jonas's hand, the Métis boy's face set with a quiet resolve. The ledger's truth had shattered Malon's lies, but truth alone couldn't mend a frontier carved by hate. Elara's work was far from done. Dawn broke over the mesas in the winter of 1878, painting the sky in streaks of fire and ash. Elara sat in the fort's infirmary, her arm bound in rough gauze, the air sharp with the tang of antiseptic and sage. Sergeant Hollis, a bear of a man with a voice like gravel, took charge after Malon's fall, his orders crisp but wary. "No blood today," he growled to his men, "but keep your rifles close." Outside, Chayton's warriors camped beyond the walls, their teepees a stark contrast to the fort's rigid lines. The truce was a thread, thin as spider silk, and every glance between soldier and warrior threatened to snap it. Elara met Hollis in his office, a cramped room littered with maps and whiskey bottles. "We need a treaty," she said, her voice steady despite the pain pulsing in her shoulder. "Not just words, something both sides can live with." Hollis rubbed his grizzled jaw, his eyes narrowing. "You're asking me to sell peace to men who've buried brothers, to Comanche arrows." Elara leaned forward, her shadow sharp on the wall. "And Chayton's asking his warriors to trust men who've burned their homes. We're all bleeding, Sergeant. Time to stitch the wound." Chayton joined them, his presence filling the room like a storm held in check. He carried no weapons, only a beaded pouch, a gesture of intent. "My people want grazing rights," he said, his English deliberate, each word a stone laid carefully. "And no more soldiers on our sacred ridges." Hollis snorted, but Elara cut in. "Give them the ridges. In return, they'll guard the migrant trails. No more raids, no more ambushes." The idea hung heavy, a bridge no one had dared build. Hollis stared at her, then at Chayton, weighing the cost of trust against the certainty of war. Days bled into weeks, and Black Mesa became a strange crucible. Soldiers and Comanche sat at uneasy councils, bartering terms over bitter coffee and smoked venison. Elara moved between them, her wound slowing her, but not her will. She translated not just words, but intentions, catching the flicker of fear in a private's eye, or the pride in a warrior's stance. Jonas proved her shadow, his Métis heritage, a quiet bridge. He spoke of his mother, her death a warning of what happened when trust failed, and his voice, young but unyielding, swayed doubters on both sides. One evening, under a sky bruised purple, Elara found Chayton by the fort's corral, tending his pony with hands gentle despite their scars. "You're still here," she said, her breath fogging in the chill. He glanced at her, his eyes dark as obsidian, holding a weight she couldn't name. "You asked for truth," he said. "I stay to see it through." She nodded, the silence between them thick with unspoken debts. Her shoulder ached, but her heart carried a new burden, a flicker of hope, dangerous as a spark in dry grass. By summer 1879, Black Mesa was transformed. A treaty, inked on rough parchment, bound soldier and Comanche to shared patrols, shared land, shared peace. Fragile but real. Stone pillars rose outside the fort, carved with symbols of both peoples. An eagle for the Comanche, a star for the cavalry. Children played in the dust, their laughter mingling, untainted by the hate their fathers carried. Elara stood on a ridge, her duster flapping in the warm wind, no longer a scout or a warrior's ally, but something else, a keeper of the crack in the wall. Chayton approached, his step silent, his presence a steady heat at her side. "You've changed this place," he said, his voice low, like the desert's hum. Elara looked at the pillars, the fort, the horizon. "We did," she corrected, her eyes meeting his. "And we're not done." The wind carried their words away, but the stones held them fast, a promise etched where blood once spilled. Elara Boone's journey from a hardened scout to a bridge between worlds leaves us with a question. Can truth truly outshine vengeance? Her story, etched in the stones of Black Mesa, challenges us to see beyond hate. What did you feel as Elara and Chayton forged their fragile peace? Share your thoughts below. Your voice keeps this tale alive. We're grateful for every moment you spent riding this dusty trail with us, feeling the desert's pulse. Until the next story calls, keep chasing the horizon. We'll meet again under these wide, starlit skies, ready for another ride. Stay true, folks, and let's hear where this story took you.